Everybody, and welcome to the AEP question and answer session here at the 2021 CAPPO conference. I would like to let everybody know that this is a Zoom meeting. So unlike the Zoom webinars that you've been previously attending, this one is intended to be interactive, which means you can turn on your video if you'd like. If you want to ask a question, you can do so over voice or in the chat, whichever you prefer. But I thought a 30-minute break from watching PowerPoint presentations might be good for everybody. It's good to see a couple friendly faces. I see Boyd on there with some fantastic looking helicopters behind him. Good to see you, Boyd. Adrian, good to see you online as well. There's a lot of people that I don't know, so it's good to meet everybody and have this chance to speak about the AEP program. And again, answer any questions. For those of you that are prior submitters, take for example, Boyd, if you have any tips or comments that you'd like to add to the conversation, please feel free to do so. I'd also like to introduce three of our team evaluators from California. We have Jeff Wasserman from Eastern Municipal Water District in Southern California. We have Jayne from the County of Stockton, and also April Pay from Placer up here in Northern California. And they're here to offer some tips, tricks, comments, and to answer any questions that everybody may have as well. So with that, I'll start with a couple things that I think everybody will probably want to know, and that is, when's the new application coming out? Well, we're working on the final touches to the 2021 application. And we hope to have the PDF version posted online mid-January. And then the AEP portal open for submissions February 1. We're reverting back to our regular timelines. The due date will once again be May 15th of 2021. Assuming no unprecedented pandemics, civil unrest, plagues, locusts, anything like that may happen between now and then. We hope to go back to our normal schedule. Another question that we've gotten recently is, when can I expect to receive my trophy? So if you are someone that has submitted and received the award this year, I can let you know that the trophies are currently being engraved. We were behind a little bit due to our schedule being adjusted for COVID. And also, believe it or not, the factory that produces our very large, very heavy trophies got flooded. So that was another thing that took us back a few weeks. But I do know we just approved the proof yesterday, so they are going into production now. And they should start being mailed out. We do them about 20 at a time in the mail outs. They should start going out the middle of this month. And with that, I'd like to open it up to any questions, comments. Anybody, you can ask over video, or you can put your comments in the chat, and then we'll open it up to our evaluators to respond and offer some tips and tricks.
Hey Brian, just a quick side question: flooded with water or flooded with orders?
Flooded with water.
Oh.
Yeah. Unfortunately, as you know, those trophies are, we're very particular about the stock that we use. They're very heavy, and there's only a certain place that we can get the stone for those. And this year was also a little bit different because they are a silver anniversary trophy, 25th anniversary version. And yeah, good question. It was flooded with water, believe it or not. How about some other questions in regards to any of the criteria?
Well, I know, so we have one of the people that helped us with our application this year is on board. Unfortunately, her mic and her camera aren't functioning. She's working with IT to get that fixed, but she helped me with the application. We all do the application as a team. We went we looked at our scorecard, and I hope I'm going to ask this question as politely as possible, because we really just want to know. But sometimes we get a pass or we get okay on an item, and then the next year the item isn't passed. And it just seems to differ. Now, I know the evaluators change from year to year. Just curious what the succession is. Do you guys have a bridge? Do you talk with the outgoing evaluators? How does that work?
That's a good question, Boyd, and it does happen. There could be a couple reasons for the discrepancy in scoring from year to year. One is the criteria change. As you know, we continuously try and update the criteria each year, and with best practices as we move forward. So that could possibly be one reason for the discrepancy. You mentioned another one, and that is the evaluators change. We have tried to draft the criteria in such a way that we can be very objective, but there are a lot of criteria that we just can't do that, and it is subjective. And what constitutes a valid submittal one year may not be seen that way following it. And a third reason is we could be wrong. You know, there's definite times that we make mistakes. We do have a 20-person team who definitely does their best, and we spend a lot of time reviewing these. On average, we get about 200 applications a year. And as long as it takes you guys to put together the applications, you can manage how long it takes us to review those. So there have been times in the past that we've made mistakes. And as far as the succession plan, the evaluators are appointed from the sponsor agency. So for example, from CAPPO, Gary and Jeff are the appointed AEP representatives from CAPPO. They serve 4-year terms, and they are staggered on a 2-year basis, so that we always have one senior evaluator from a particular sponsor organization. And we do that to try and keep the consistency. Now, we also have a couple at-large evaluators. April's one of those. And we also have an at-large evaluator from Texas. California and Texas are the 2 major areas where we get a majority of our applications from. So, but things happen. Sometimes people drop off, and we have to substitute. We also are trying to keep evaluators consistent in what they review from year to year. For example, let's say April reviewed questions 1, 2, and 3 this year. We would try and have her review the same questions next year to keep that consistency. But with all of that, there's multiple reasons. What I can tell you is if you have a question or would like some additional information, or you just think we're wrong, you can always send that to me. And what I'll do is I'll review the response, compare it to the criteria submission requirements, review it with the evaluators, and then we'll make a determination to see if we think that the evaluation was correct. And many times we overturn it and you get the good score. So if any of you or anybody else has any questions like that, feel free to email that directly to me. We're not calling it a protest, but you know, if you have questions on your scoring, we'll definitely take that.
Thank you, Brian.
You bet.
I'd like to just say something. One of the evaluators this year ended up having to bow out. And when that evaluator had to bow out, we had to go through and split up the questions. And that's another way that, that somebody else might be looking at a particular criteria versus last year. And that's just unavoidable.
Understood. Believe me, I not for future applications. I just want to be clear. That wasn't being critical. That was just to understand it more. No. And I hope you understand. I mean, I hope that's okay.
Very good question.
That's great.
Brian, I've got a question for you.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Can you, in a nutshell or a Reader's Digest version, as someone who hasn't done this before, just kind of from a beginning to end, go through the process of of the applications and what, any kind of criteria ahead of time that would need to be, minimum qualifications, things like that. Can you go through that for me?
You bet. And I'll do that, and then I'll open it up to our evaluators as well to maybe offer you some tips as a first-time participant. One thing I'll let you know is doing your application for the very first time is tough. It takes a lot of time. You have to gather a lot of data, and there's some things that you have to do in advance, such as surveys. There's certification requirements that obviously you can't just get on the fly. However, what I will say is the application is designed such that there are 200 possible points, but you only have to get 100 to be successful. And the reason for that is the committee realizes that one, not everybody can do everything. There's different laws, there's different agency requirements, there's different policies. So what one agency may be able to do to get points, another agency just may not be able to because of the law. Also, there's because I talked about a lot of the pre-planning that goes into it, there's sometimes that can't be done as well. So the first step as a new applicant, I would say, would be to go online to the NPI website, download, if you're going now, download the 2020 application. Come mid-January, the 2021 should be available. And scan that and take a look through the criteria. And at the end, there's a self-evaluation tool. And what I would always recommend people do is they go through that self-evaluation tool and they mark off the things that they know that they can get. And then they mark off the things that they can get but have to work on. And add up those points. And if you are 100 or over with those points, then you know that you have the possibility of receiving the award. Now, we always suggest that people apply for greater than 100 because almost all applications lose points in one criteria or the other. So if you apply for more, you'll have a better chance. The second thing that I would recommend that you do is join NPI, National Procurement Institute. There's two reasons for that. One is that you get access to the AEP model submittals. So the evaluators, as they're evaluating, they will mark particular applications, particular criteria as a model submittal, and they will use that the following year as examples for people to take a look at and help build their applications if they need help in a particular area. The second reason is that you get a $200 discount on your AEP application fee. The NPI membership fee is $90. So for $90, you get access to the model submittals and you get a $200 discount. Believe it or not, we still have people that submit and aren't NPI members and pay a full $600 membership fee. I don't know why, to tell you the truth. But again, you have a lot of advantages to joining NPI with the AEP award. You also have the availability of doing mentorships. And depending on what type of agency you are and where you're located, we can assign an AEP evaluator to help mentor you through that first year process. Now, they can't tell you if for sure you're going to get points on a particular criterion, but what they can do is provide you guidance and tips on how to assemble that and what types of things that the committee is looking for. We have representatives from cities, counties, special districts, K through 12, higher education, and state levels. So we have people that can match up with whatever agency type you are and give you that guidance through the application process. April, Gary, Jeff, any other tips for first-time evaluators? We were all, or excuse me, first-time applicants, because we were all a first-timer at one point in our lives.
Yeah, this is Jeff. I think, Brian, the tips that you gave were great. I was checking them off my list as I was going through, so those definitely. The other thing is start soon. It does, as a first-time applicant, it takes, some of these criteria can take a long time to respond to. Some are, fairly straightforward, pretty easy. You can do relatively quickly. Others are going to take you a little bit of time to read through and make sure you understand and really go through the application a few times and make sure you have a good understanding of the ones that you want to apply for. And then, as Brian said, you can reach out to any one of the AEP evaluators to provide some input if you need further clarification on anything.
Excellent, thanks, Jeff. April, Gary, anything to add?
I do. You pretty much, as Jeff was saying, you pretty much hit some of the things that I was going to mention. The first one is if you have anybody who you know who has submitted and they've achieved the award, then you might want to ask them for their submission. Obviously, you're not going to copy it, but it could be a roadmap for your own organization to follow. And what Brian said is when you go in and you start looking at the form where you try to figure out what you have and what you don't have, focus your time on what you have and what you know, because that's going to be the easiest part for you to go through and work on your submission. If there's a question about it, go ahead and set it to the side and follow Jeff's advice about starting early, because the earlier you start, the more time you're going to have to be able to go back through. So then after you knock out the easy ones, you kind of see where you're going to stand in your overall points. And then you can start going back and looking at the ones that may be marginal, or maybe maybe you're missing part of the information or part of the criteria, but that you can go through and, as Brian was saying, do a survey, or grab some documents for certifications, or for your staff's education levels and stuff like that, whether or not they have those things. That way you can start gathering that information and getting the criteria set up, so that way the more points that you know that you can get, the better off you're going to end up being.
I would agree with everything that my other three colleagues have already said. I think it just start. Don't be intimidated. Don't think that you're not good enough, because your agency is probably doing a better job than you think. You just haven't tried yet. And definitely contact other agencies who have received the award, especially if it's an agency that you feel that you're similar to, or maybe an agency that you admire. You think that they are doing a good job with their agency. Ask them for copies of their programs, even if it's not among the model submittals that you see on NPI. Sometimes the criteria can be a little intimidating. I'm not quite sure what you're looking for. I don't know how to articulate that. I think I meet that requirement, but I'm not sure how to describe it. But when you look at someone else's submittal, it's, the light bulb turns on and you think, oh, well, that's easy. I can do that. And remember, there's no such thing as plagiarism in public procurement.
That's great. Thank you all. And I will also add, if you're in a CAPPO chapter, you have the opportunity to request one of the evaluators to attend a chapter meeting and discuss. I know Jeff Wasserman has done that a few times down in Southern California and provided great information. Again, also use the mentors that are available, and you can contact me directly for a mentorship. The last thing I'll add to this question is that if you can't reach the 100 points, that's okay. Use it as a roadmap to develop your processes and procedures for the following year. I've even had agencies reach out and say, "Hey, Brian, we can't afford the $400 for the application this year, but we're still doing it because it helps us in the future. We're still planning on applying in the future, and we're using this as a roadmap to get there." It's being used to elevate their own policies and procedures in what's been determined to be best practices. So, like everybody said, start early. If you can't make it this year, plan on it for next year. looks like we had a question come in. It says, did you mention that you do not have to be a big agency to complete the application? A one-person department can do it. Our first 3 awards, I pulled this information together myself. It can be done. Tim, thank you for that comment. That's definitely true. I myself was a one-person department back when I was in Arizona, and received the AEP application award myself. And it's, as you know, it is definitely a struggle, but it can be done. So anybody that's thinking that you have to be big or have lots of employees, you don't. You can do it yourself, and we'll definitely help you. So thank you for that comment, Tim. Now I'm going to open it up to April, Gary, and Jeff to maybe talk a little bit about what they evaluated this year, and just offer any tips on preparing the submissions for next year. So April, how about we start with you?
Well, I don't have any specific comments on the criteria that I evaluated, but based on my experience, please recognize, as Brian said, we have 200 applications. And although none of us reviews every single criterion of every single application, it's still a big job. So you start getting cross-eyed after a while. And I apologize if we're not consistent or we simply make those mistakes. But what can really help is if you are, a lot of us are really good writers, and some people write as if they're paid by the word, and we get pages and pages of descriptions in each of the criteria. But it would really be helpful if you could be more concise. Don't be wordy. Explain everything thoroughly, but conciseness is really helpful. Something as simple as page numbers and making sure that the links that you include in your submittal are active so that we can follow up on those. I mean, those are really simple things, but those are some of the mistakes that some people make. And pay attention to those comments from the previous year. As Boyd pointed out, his agency looks at those really carefully. We try to make helpful comments, especially if we don't approve your submittal for one of the criterion. And sometimes we'll make comments on those that we do approve. So that we want you to, well, we passed you this time, but what we really want to see is this extra information or a better explanation of something. So please take that to heart. If you don't understand them, contact Brian. We'll get a better explanation for you. But this year especially, we seem to see a lot of agencies who overlooked those comments, submitted the same old thing they submitted before, and we had to deny them because they didn't take our advice to make those improvements. So there's probably a million other things, but I'll yield the floor.
That's it. I'll jump in real quick before I move on to Gary. It's a real good point, April, is a lot of times something will be accepted 1 year, and this goes back to Boyd's question, but we'll put in the comments, say, for next year, please do this. And we can see the comments from prior years, and a lot of times people don't, as April mentioned, they just submit the same thing. So unfortunately, at that point, because they didn't follow the instructions for, from the prior year, we don't give them points. So make sure to read those comments. The scorecards are available online in the NPI, the AEP portal, not the NPI website. There's 2 different sections, the AEP portal. Once you log in, under the history tab, you can view your submissions and your scorecards from all the prior years back 5 or 6 years now when we started doing it online. So make sure to review those comments prior to submitting for next year. With that, I'll open it up. Gary, do you have any additional comments?
I do. Fantastic. Thank you very much. One of the things that can end up having you get it 1 year and not the next year is dates. A lot of our submissions are for such and such a date from January 1 to December 31st or whatever, where you're having to show like your auction results and different things like that. If you just go with last year's submission, you've just eliminated that criteria from being accepted. You're using old information for the submittal, and you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you're using current information. I talked to my submitter, and her response was, if there's a report that gets updated annually and it's part of your submission, update your submission and then it's in there. That way it's fresh on your mind and you've done it before. And so that way you're keeping your submissions up to date. Because if you get a report and you think, well, I'll just do that later, and then you forget about it, then you've possibly just eliminated that criteria from being accepted. One of the other tips that she has is she says, have someone else, hopefully within procurement, take a look at it. Sometimes fresh eyes can see things, and it can help you either refresh or delete some of the extra information. They don't have to necessarily know how it's going to be judged, but if they read, as evaluators, the only thing that we have is the criteria. We have to go back to the criteria, and everything is based on that criteria. We don't know how everybody's individual organization operates. We don't know the hierarchy or the structure. We try to get an idea from the submittals, but we don't know exactly how it works. And so we have to go back to that criteria, and then we go right down the criteria of everything that's supposed to be there. And then we go look at your submission, and we start looking for the criteria and trying to see if those things are there. And if the criteria says it, but it's not in your submission, then it gets very difficult for us to go through and do that. Sometimes we'll ask for 2 or 3 different things, and we'll get the first thing, but then not the second and the third. And so then it makes it very difficult for us, because we're supposed to have all of that information, all of the parts for that criteria. And if they're not being submitted, then we can't really go through and give you the points. And that's where, if somebody else is looking at it who's in the profession, could look at that for you and then look at it and then say, well, you know, you've got the first one, but where are your other 2? You know, how would you show those other 2? And that would be most helpful on our end, because we're going to go to the criteria and then match it to your submission. And we do that hundreds of times, because we don't just do one question. We do several questions, and we do part A, B, C, and D and stuff like that. So we're constantly going back to the criteria and matching it to the submission. And we try to march right down them, so that way, if everything lines up and it's apparent that everything's there, you get the credit for the criteria.
Excellent, thanks, Gary. And I'll respond to a question from Angelic Davis in the chat before we move on to Jeff for some final comments. And she said, we received feedback that we should not include the entire P-card manual one year. The next year, we included the cover page and the table of contents, and received comments to include more pages to substantiate its comments. That is a little bit contradictory, and I understand the frustration. You know, we try and revise the criteria slightly each year based on what we've seen in the past. And so sometimes we'll get an entire manual, and it's like 60 pages long, and we don't have time to go through it. So we'd say, okay, just give us the cover page and table of contents. And then based on that, you know, we had some instances where we really couldn't tell if it was substantial enough to cover things like training, policy, procedures, things like that. So what we did is I think the way that it reads now is cover page and table of contents, or additional information or additional sections to show the comprehensive nature of the program. So that's what we're really looking for. Not specifically cover page and table of contents or the entire thing, but we want to make sure that there's enough information that we can see that it covers, that it's comprehensive. Now, if your entire manual is 8 or 10 pages, sure, submit the entire manual. It's not, you know, it's not a big deal. But sometimes for procurement manuals, for legislation, we've seen things that are like 200 pages long, and we don't have the capacity to go through all of that and find stuff. So I'm glad to see that you received the points both years. And again, we're trying to be as consistent as possible. But thanks for that feedback. We do appreciate it. We only have a few minutes left.
Sorry, I have a question. I have a really
tag on to that.
Oh, sure.
I want to tag on to what Brian just said. Sometimes you do have to submit multiple pages. And if it's because there's a certain important bit of information on that page, if you could highlight it, circle it, draw our attention to it, make it easier for us to find, we can get through that quickly. Sometimes we will miss it because just because of the sheer volume.
It's a great comment. Thank you, April. And it is noon right now, so if anybody needs to drop off, completely understand. However, I'm happy to be here until we get all the questions answered. So, Jayne, you had a question on that.
Yeah, just a quick question. What is a rough estimate for a first-time applicant for the preparation, like the lead up to application? Like how much time should I dedicate? Like what's a timeline that would be a reasonable timeline?
Well, as far as when to start, start now. Take a look at last year's application and start assembling stuff. I can tell you that next year's application is not going to substantially change. There may be a little bit of wording change. I'm happy to also say that we are adding the NIGP CPP certification to the list of certifications that qualify for points under criteria 10A and 10B. But other than that, there's not going to be any significant changes. So look at the application, start assembling information now. As far as the amount of time it's going to take you over the next 4 months, that's really, really hard to really hard to judge. But I would just say start as early as you possibly can. That's my best.
Thank you.
Suggestion. You're welcome.
Do you mind if
Jeff,
I add to that, Brian?
Go ahead, Boyd.
Just real quick, if you're a first-time application, what's going to take some time is if you come up to a criteria and you're not doing that, but you want to do it so you can add it to your application, that's going to take some time. But take it from somebody who's been up till 10, 11 o'clock because you waited. Start, just like Brian said, start now. Start now.
Thanks, Boyd. And I know we only have a couple more minutes online, so Jeff, I'll open it up to you for any last minute suggestions or tips.
Sure. So I guess the most important thing for me is just to read the criteria and make sure that applicants are submitting on the criteria that is requested with the years. Keep in mind the years and what we're asking for. I know one tip as an applicant myself, I tend to look at the model submittals from previous years to see what they're doing. And typically those model submittals are concise and they provide the exact information that we're looking for as well. And then just to let everybody know, as evaluators, we want to give you points. We definitely do. We go back. I know personally when I don't give points, I'll go back and look at the previous years and see if there are any differences and, maybe put it on hold for a little bit and come back to it the next day and with a fresh set of eyes and look. But I guess just being concise and meeting the requirements is probably the biggest thing that I have, the biggest, biggest item I would recommend.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. I just want to let everybody know I put my email in the chat. If you have any additional questions following this, please feel free to email me. You can also reach out to April, Gary, or Jeff with any questions. And as I think April mentioned, feel free to reach out to other agencies. I know other agencies that have been successful are happy to share their information. And we want, as Jeff mentioned, we're disappointed when we can't give people points. We're disappointed when someone applies and takes all the time and pays the money and doesn't make it. We have failed applicants every year. So please use us as resources. Join MPI if you haven't already. Use MPI as a resource with the model submittals. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to challenge everybody on here who has not submitted before to do so this year in 2021. We have a little friendly competition between California and Texas every year, but we haven't won in a while. This last year, Texas had 46 awards. California had 42. I'd like everybody to please apply. Again, if you need help, feel free to email me or one of the evaluators, and let's beat Texas next year. With that, I will sign off. Thank you all for attending. I will remind you, please visit all the sponsors. We couldn't do this event without the sponsors, and please make sure that that you go into the virtual rooms, visit the sponsors, talk with them, even if it's just to say, hey, thanks for sponsoring CAPPO this year. Thanks to the CAPPO committee and team led by our president, Mike Durf, for putting this great virtual conference together. And again, thank you all for attending. Have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.